welcome. Today we're going to talk to Lori Knight. She was formerly with Disneyland Resorts. And how are you doing today, Lori?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
Good. We're really happy to have you here on the show today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're just going to ask you some few questions. We're excited to hear about your experiences and what you're doing now. So with that, tell me about your job at Disneyland and where did you start it? Where did you get your start at Disneyland?
At Disney, well, my start was in guest health services. That was the department that I started as a part-time registered nurse. And just over time, worked more and more and more because the hours were available and it was fun and always different. And over time, just worked my way up through the ranks more accidentally than on purpose, to tell you the truth. Just being in the right place at the right time and being able, willing to take on projects. And I think that helped with my career trajectory there. And then ultimately, I was the nurse manager in charge of guest health services. That's the emergency medical services for the Disneyland Resort. I led a team of 101 registered nurses and EMTs. And it was a great department. And people I worked with were just amazing. They put their heart and soul into everything they did there. So, yeah, that's in a sense.
I'm not sure, until I met you, I wasn't even aware that there were nurses at Disney. So they have a whole medical staff on scene, or how does that? How does that work?
Yes, we do. Well, we always like to say we're the ninjas because people would come into first aid, or we would respond out to where they might have had an accident. Trips and falls were very common. People were so caught up in the magic and looking around and seeing everything, often for the first time, that they just didn't notice obstructions or other guests in their way. And, so they'd have a minor catastrophe, which easy to fix. We resolve it and send them on with their day. But it was, I think the big thing for us was that we felt we were the ninjas. Nobody knew we were there. We would respond out in the park, and people were pretty oblivious to us because they were so caught up in the magic and in the moment and sharing these great experiences with their family members, that they just didn't see the nurse in the wheelchair just walking quickly by them. We never ran because that would attract attention. And it also presented safety hazards for ourselves and our guests. But we were out there, and we didn't wear nurses' whites or anything like that. What we wore was pretty nondescript: polo shirt, dark pants, and so we got through the crowds pretty easily. We had our security officers that would help clear the way for us. But for the most part, people went on with their visits year after year and never knew we existed. So they were having a great time. I always said people were not there to see us. So, yeah.
True. Yeah. Unless they needed you, and then they, of course, then they would want you there.
They were happy to see us.
That's funny that you.
And we would take care of them. Yeah.
That's funny that you talk about people when they get to Disney World. They're just so happy with the magic. I think that I've talked to you about this before. My mom retired out of Disney World in Florida, and my brother worked there for 20 years.
Okay.
And they would tell me stories about people so excited to be at Disney World that they would jump out of their cars, leave all their doors open, and run. And, security would go around and find all these cars with doors open.
Yeah, that's exactly true. It was true on the West Coast as well. Yeah. And I was fortunate in my tenure at Disney to work some of the time in Florida to help with their marathon weekends, that kind of thing, to work with their response teams, and because we really wanted to sync up what we did, the services that we offered to the guests. And so we would meet, and I was even set to get the Hong Kong Disneyland started, get their first aid set up, their policies and processes. And that was really exciting. I had never been to Asia, and to be there in Hong Kong, of course, they sent me in July and August, right before they opened in September. And those are the hottest, stickiest months of the year in Hong Kong. And I just was dripping wet the whole time. I just was sweaty and red-faced, and my counterparts there were just lovely registered nurses there in Hong Kong, and they wanted to link arms and walk close together everywhere we went. And I was just so hot. It was miserable, but you couldn't say anything. You just had to accept the graciousness and hospitality. But it really was wonderful. It was a different environment. And I've also been to Tokyo Disneyland, and if I had to choose the cleanest park of all of our parks, Tokyo Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea would be those parks. They're immaculate, absolutely gorgeous.
Wow. What an amazing experience. And the culture is so different. Did you have to take culture classes before you left?
Well, before I went to Asia, yes, definitely. There are certain things you do. There are certain things you don't do. Just in giving and receiving business cards, that was something they pointed out to us. When you hand someone your business card, you take it in your hands, both hands, thumbs at the top. The writing on the card is facing the person. You present the card that way. Now, if someone is giving me their business card there, I accept it, thumbs on top, and the writing is towards me. I take it and admire it. You have to admire the business card. Oftentimes, one side of the card will be in Chinese and the other side in English, or Japanese and English. But you always look at it and you appreciate that they gave their business card to you, and you thank them. And it never goes in your back pocket. That would be rude. You never write on their business card. Also a big no-no. So you put it in, if you're carrying a portfolio or something, a folder, you put it in there, someplace where it's going to be protected. So business cards are
wow. And, here we write on them and throw them in, fishbowl jars.
Oh, yeah.
For a free lunch.
Exactly. Desk drawer,
That's
whatever.
crazy. Yeah.
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 Exactly. Well, you can write on your own. You just don't write on somebody else's.
Okay. So when you started at Disneyland, you were given projects, and from all that you're saying and what I know of you, you were definitely a go-getter. What kind of projects did you tackle while you were there?
I think my biggest project that I'm most proud of is the AED program, the public access AED program. When I arrived at the Disneyland Resort, we had 3 AEDs that the nurses carried, and that was it for 365 acres of property at the time. And so we just started talking about expanding that, because public access defibrillator programs were brand new back then. This is about 2000. And so we started plotting where the AEDs might go. Now, our Imagineers, the folks at Disney that create the beautiful scenery that you see, the show, they weren't too happy having these intrusive devices glaring at the guests. And so I think my photo was on a wanted poster in their office for quite some time. But people got past it. I kept saying, it's like a fire extinguisher. You have those all over the place. People don't think twice about it. Let's get those AEDs out. And then there were the naysayers. They said, oh, they're going to be stolen. If the guests can get to them, or they're not in a secure area that can be stolen or moved or whatever. And we didn't have that happen. People understood the value of the AED program, and we also taught AED and CPR training out of our Department of Guest Health Services. And so we trained any cast member that wanted to be trained, and we had certain cast members that, because of their role in the show, needed the training. It was required for them. And so we trained thousands every year, and we're very proud of that program. It's very successful.
That sounds great.
In fact, now
I'm all for.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And we finally got it so that it's part of the culture. Anytime there's refurbishment of any attraction, or we build new buildings and new attractions and new lands, they think about where the AED is going to go. And that was huge, just getting that to be part of the Disney culture. And I think the fact that we've proven that they save lives, you can't argue with results.
Right. So you're the dispatch center at Disneyland. Do they have all the locations of all the AEDs?
They do. And our dispatch, our security central communications, that's a great team of folks that make sure that the right responders get where they need to be. And they had a list of all the AEDs and their locations, the phone line that was attached to the AED box, because we had a ring down phone that would ring directly to 911, to the city, from our AED boxes.
Okay.
And then there was a good connection, I'll explain in a minute, between the city and our communication center. So they had those phone lines as well. They knew which AED went with which phone line. And then the AED box itself had a pressure switch that the AED sat on. And when the AED was picked up out of the box, it would ring to our security central communications. And they would know exactly, it would come up on the computer screen, the AED's been removed from this location, and they would get security responding to that location, get the nurses responding. They'd contact Anaheim, the city of Anaheim, PSAP, which was in our city for Disneyland. It was the fire department, because most of the calls from the Disneyland Resort were paramedic type calls or medical related. And so they would get the city of Anaheim dispatch going, and they would send the paramedics. And the goal was, okay, hopefully it's just a kid playing with it. And that did happen a few times. But we'd get on scene, we were able to cancel the paramedics while they were still en route. And we, make sure all the equipment's there and usable, put it back into service, and we continue on with our day. We were fortunate to have a great working relationship with the city of Anaheim, both the fire department and the police department. And so when they would get a call from someone's cell phone, somebody calls 911 because somebody fell down. As soon as they got that call, they would connect in with our security central communications, who would be on the line listening silently to what was being said. And then the city of Anaheim dispatcher would ask our folks, okay, what gate are we coming in? And where are we staging? And so it was just a seamless effort.
Wow. That's amazing. I never knew. And I'm sure all the Disney locations were set up rather similar, right? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. They're similar. There's some differences. In Florida, Reedy Creek provides their paramedics and their ambulance services, and they're already on their property. They were created when Walt Disney World was created. So the Reedy Creek Improvement District, Fire Improvement District, was created then. So it's a little bit different, but the collaboration is the same in all of our parks, including Tokyo and Hong Kong. And Shanghai as well. I consulted, but didn't go to Shanghai. I sent one of my assistant managers there for 6 weeks. She owes me big.
Yeah. Very cool. When you started your career as a nurse, Yeah, so she deserved to go.
Yeah.
When you started your field of nursing, did you ever envision that Disney was like, is that your dream job to work at Disney, or what? What did you envision for your future when you first became a nurse?
Well, like most people, I didn't know Disney had nurses. That came much later. I was an ER nurse. I also worked ICU, CCU, and I worked at this tiny little hospital near my house, and I loved it. I loved the ICU, CCU there. But because it's a small hospital, and this was well before COVID, obviously, this was in the late 90s, we didn't have a lot of patients in the ICU, which is, I guess, a good thing for the patients anyway. But that meant that we didn't work much. We would be on call. They'd say, hey, you don't have to come in. We don't have any patients for you, so just be on call in case we get somebody and respond, within an hour. And so, and that didn't pay very well, obviously. And so I kept asking my director to, hey, float me out to med surg or short stay surgery or ER or post anesthesia recovery, whatever. And he kept saying, no, flu season's coming. We're going to need you. And so I wasn't working. I was a not-for-profit employee. And so I was getting a little frustrated with that. And I had really envisioned myself retiring from that hospital eventually, because it was just such a family environment. Everybody knew everybody else, and it was just wonderful. And I was at a charity fundraiser for the Anaheim Police Department with my husband, who worked there. And he introduced me to one of his coworkers and the coworker's wife. And the coworker's wife was an RN at Disneyland. And, she, we did the usual, oh, I'm an RN, you're an RN, where do you work? Back and forth. And she said, well, I work at Disney. You should come to Disney. It's great. And I'm like, yeah, maybe someday. That sounds interesting. Well, that little seed got planted. And then as time went on,
right.
And I kept thinking, okay, I've got to decide what I'm going to do. I'm not getting any work at this hospital. Do I switch to another hospital, or what do I want to do? And that little seed was germinating for Disney. And I thought, I'll give it a shot. I'll check it out. And so I applied and interviewed, and I was hired and started there. And it was just the most amazing place. It's a culture shock just in itself. They're going from the real world to Disney, as you know, with your family members there. We speak a different language. Everything is in terms of
right.
show business, because it's a show. Walt envisioned an immersive experience for families. And that was because he would take his daughters to the park every Sunday up in Los Angeles, and they would ride the merry-go-round, and he would sit on a bench like all the other parents. And he kept thinking in the back of his mind, there's got to be a way we could be sharing new experiences together as a family. And so the concept of Disneyland was born. And so the employees at Disney are cast members, just like you have the cast in a stage production. We're all cast members. And the patrons or customers, Walt didn't like that. He thought, they're our guests. We want them to feel at home when they come to Disney. We want this to be their place. And so they became guests, and there's on stage and off stage and backstage, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stage talk, but it just is all part of what Disney is all about. And it's providing those immersive storytelling experiences for families. And I grew up coming to Disneyland maybe once every few years, living in the area, but not that frequently. So it was a real treat when we went to Disneyland when I was a kid. And my parents, the first time they were at Disneyland, it had been open less than a year. So it was a totally different experience for them. And then they got to experience it through our eyes, my eyes, my brother's eyes. And then I got to experience it with my kids. And so it's a generational thing. We see multiple generations coming to Disneyland to enjoy themselves and make a vacation of it now with the hotels and the multiple, theme parks. Lots to do.
I know I grew up enjoying it. Well, probably not grew up. I didn't actually ever go there until my mom started working there. But my kids grew up going so frequently because, family and friends, that there was a time we were down in Florida and they chose to go out on a pontoon instead of going to Disney World. So, yeah, it's... Mm-hmm. But they were there all the time.
Yeah, that's nice.
What are
That's
some
a
of the
great
fun things you
experience
did?
for them.
It was. Well, when you were there must have been a lot of fun things to do. What are some of the fun things you did?
Well, I enjoyed being part of security and emergency services. That was our division. And so we were able to be a part of a lot of the disaster drills. I got to be one of the coordinators and planners for our full-scale disaster drills, and taught my department, those that were interested, in doing the moulage or disaster makeup. And they became very, very good at it. And so no matter what the scenario was, they had makeup plans for our victims. And our victims were off-duty cast members that volunteered to work at these drills. And we would invite not only our local police and fire department from Anaheim, but neighboring departments, neighboring cities as well. The FBI would be involved. Secret Service might be involved, just depending on what's going on, the local fusion center. It was totally an immersive experience. And our actors, our victims, they loved it. They loved getting the moulage. They always wanted to be the bloodiest person out there. And they were disappointed if they really didn't have a bloody part. But the grosser, the better. We would bring them in and start doing the moulage a couple hours before the drill would begin. And then we'd feed them dinner, just like a box lunch kind of dinner. And I have photos that I keep and I'll always have, where our victims, they look like their necks ripped open or all these horrible things happening to them. And they're sitting there eating a sandwich and smiling and having a great time. And it was a lot of fun to do that. And I involved my daughter in writing the victim scripts so that the victims all had, that they knew who they were and what their backstory was, and are they there with other people? Are they there by themselves? We also included victims that were in wheelchairs, actually cast members that used wheelchairs. We involved blind cast members, deaf cast members, because in the real world, that's what could be in your disaster, and the first responders need to know how to overcome that. We also involved cast members that were multilingual, and so they would pretend they didn't speak any English, and they would be talking to the responders and not understanding what the responders wanted them to do, that kind of stuff. So we would make it pretty difficult. Now, I always kept my moulage team separate from my responders team, from my department, because they're part of the drill as well. I didn't want them having the answers to the test beforehand, because they needed to know how to keep themselves safe, to look for hazards that might have occurred as a result of whatever this disaster was. And so I made sure they knew nothing about it. And the moulage team, they were sworn to secrecy. And so we could see how they'd actually perform in a disaster. And to a person, they were absolutely incredible. We worked very hard to train the nurses and EMTs to make sure they knew how to respond to any kind of disaster, making sure they were safe, making sure their victims were as safe as possible, and as well as other responders. So it was great. We trucked in a single-engine plane that was decaying outside Ontario International Airport, and put it down in is to set it down from a forklift into Toontown. And that became the focus of one of our disaster drills. And so we involved a lot of tech people in providing, smoke and things that would make it very real. We wanted it to be as real as possible. I think the icing on the cake one time was when the Anaheim SWAT team was going through one of our buildings, and we, placed all our victims here, there, and everywhere. And they just stopped and they looked at this one, I think it was a compound fracture that we had created. And they're like, "Oh, look at that. That's cool." And I thought, yeah, we're doing a good job. We got the police to stop what they were doing, break character, and look at the pretend wound.
Wow. What fun. That sounds like a blast.
It was great. It was.
When did you do those trainings?
Mm-hmm. After the park was closed, we would do that.
Okay.
So we would run our drills from like 10 p.m. till like 1 in the morning sometimes. It just depended. We also helped with evacuation exercises off the many attractions that we had. I got to rappel from one, and that was a lot of fun. I had never rappelled before. I was attached to a fireman. Fortunately, it was somebody I knew, because that's really up close and personal. But it was a lot of fun. It was great. I was terrified at first, but it was a lot of fun.
Wow. Sounds like you have some great memories while you were working there. And you did a lot with EMS. They were part of your crew. How often did you work with law enforcement and 911 other than the disasters you spoke of?
Other than disaster drills, we worked every day. We would be on calls. There are police detectives on property, so they might be walking through the park. Nobody would even notice them. They're wearing nondescript clothing as well. And they might show up on scene with us and say, "Hey, Lori, you need anything from us?" "No, we're good, thanks." And it was just a great working relationship with all those guys. When we would get a new crop of paramedics in the city, either transferring from other cities into Anaheim or brand new paramedics, we would, their EMS Manager, Captain Dave Berry, would contact me and say, "Okay, we need to do an overview at Disney." And I'd be, "Great, let's go." And we'd set it up. We'd explain how response works. We'd explain the connection between the communication centers and the AD program. We would show them all the exterior gates, the gates that they come through from the streets, and then interior gates where they would stage. And then once we've gotten them really well oriented to how we do EMS at Disney, then I would take them on an attraction. And I'd set it up with our attractions management partners. "Hey, what attraction can we do? I've got 19 guys." And they're like, "Well, let's put them on Pirates of the Caribbean." And the guys always loved it. They always managed, because they were big guys and all 19 of them fitting in one of those boats. They would they would pretty much bottom out the boat in the sand, and they'd have to get it rocking to get it moving again. But they had a great
That's
time,
funny.
and it was a lot of fun. Yeah, good people.
Do you have a story that you can share about an event in Disney that made a big impact on you? I know you've shared some things that you've done. Do you have a specific story that still sticks out in your mind?
My absolute favorite story has to do with our AD CPR program, of course. I'm very proud of that program, but this story was really, to me, the quintessential save. There was a cast member, one of our employees, backstage in a break area. He was sitting at a picnic table with another cast member, and they were just having their mid-morning break, and he suddenly collapsed. The cast member that was with him started screaming, and two other cast members who just happened to be in the area. They heard the screaming. They checked it out. And that's the one thing, Disney cast members want to help. They are just, that's in their nature. And they don't have to be part of the EMS. They can be cast members from any walk of life. They want to help, whether it's a fellow cast member or guest in that. That's what makes the AD program so successful there. And these two cast members came running, and they sized up the situation. One, and this is many years ago now, one started CPR. The other knew where the closest AED was, because that's what we always told him, know where the closest AEDs to your area are. And he grabbed the AED, brought it back, and they had attached it, and it was analyzing the rhythm when I arrived on scene, along with other nurses and security. And they told me what happened, and the AD at that point was advising me to give him a shock. So I made sure it was clear, gave him the shock, and we're about to start compressions again on him. And his eyes came open, and I'm up at looking down at his face, and I said, "John, you with me?" And he says, "Yep." I went, "Great, okay." And it kind of surprised me. And so we kept talking. He was able to give me his medical history, the medications that he takes, everything. And so paramedics arrived from the city of Anaheim, arrived just a couple of minutes later, and they got on scene. And these are guys I had worked with for years and years and years. And they said, "Lori, what do you got?" I go, "Well, this is John. He's 56 years old, and he was a cardiac arrest." They looked at me like I was insane. They did not believe me. And they said, "Hello, John." And he says, "Hello." Gives him the history, gives him everything he had told me. And they're like, "Well, let's get you to the hospital, I guess." They started an IV just in case, put him in the ambulance, and off they went to the local hospital, which was like a 3-minute drive. I went back to my office. I downloaded the data from the AED and read the printout. And sure enough, he had been in a pulseless V-tach, which is a shockable rhythm. And I looked at that and I went, "Oh, that's beautiful." And I see where the shock was administered, and I see this beautiful normal sinus rhythm afterwards. And I'm like, that was really amazing. And the two guys that had stepped in to help him, they had taken our 8D and CPR class like 2 months prior to that. And it was like they just went into it. They were doing textbook perfect CPR when, as we were arriving. Well, the paramedics get John to the hospital. They explain to the ER doc, "This is John. He's 56 years old. Here's his history." And he was a cardiac arrest, shocked once. And the doc goes, "Really?" And she didn't believe him either. So they called me at my office. And I'm like, "What don't you people understand? This stuff works." And so I took my printout from my AED, and I drove over to the hospital and showed the doc. And she looked through it. She goes, "Wow, he was." That's what we're trying to tell you. And so ultimately, he had bypass surgery in the next day or two, and was actually back to work in about a month and a half. Yeah, it was wonderful.
That's amazing.
Wonderful save. Saves don't always materialize quite like that. So it was something that will stay with me forever. And while I was there at the hospital, I asked how he was doing, and the doctor goes, "Well, he's right over there. Go say hi." And he's sitting up in a gurney and just looking around. And I said, "Hey, John, do you remember me?" And he goes, "Not really." I go, "That's okay. You don't need to remember me." That was probably
right, I'm the nurse ninja
in his life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I said, "How do you feel?" He goes, "Well, I'm okay. I feel kind of sore." I go, "Yeah, well, we had to get a little busy there." But you're here now. So we're really, really happy about that. So even today,
wow,
I talk about it and I can't help but smile.
Yeah. You've made such a difference in your career. What were your goals for your life before you decided to be a nurse, an RN?
Well, right out of high school, I thought, well, I'll be a nurse because my mom was a nurse. And I really wasn't creative as far as looking at various careers. So I became an LVN or LPN in this part of the country now. And I was working in a hospital, and I realized, wow, I really don't like this. And so I thought, what else can I do? And I knew some people that were EMTs, so I told my folks, I'm going to go back to school and become an EMT. And my dad was like, you're not going to be a nurse, you're going to push an ambulance around. And I went, yeah, that's pretty much it. So I got my EMT, and back then, and this is in 1979, back then, women didn't work on ambulances. It was really hard to get a job. We didn't have the fair labor practices that we do now, the employment opportunities that we do now. And I would go to apply at these ambulance companies, and they'd go, I'd ask for an application, and they said, well, you can fill it out. No one's going to look at it because we don't hire women. Okay, great. Thank you. And I'd leave. And I went to ambulance company after ambulance company, and I was finally hired on what was Southland Ambulance back then. It's no longer in existence. It got gobbled up over the years by larger companies. And so I worked on the ambulance and loved every minute of it. It was something new and different every day. I would find myself at car wrecks on the freeway, and at the time I was probably the smallest person on scene, and I was probably the only one that could climb in to do any assessment until they got the jaws of life to open up the vehicle and stuff.
Right.
But it was a great learning experience. I did that for quite a while. And then I worked in the ER as an LPN for a while, and then I worked for the Red Cross. Then I decided to get out of nursing altogether, and I was a travel agent for a cruise company, and that was a lot of fun because you get to travel. I was kennel help at a police dog training kennel. Yeah, that's not as glamorous as it sounds, let me tell you. You knocked out kennels. Yeah, that's what it's called. Wearing big old rubber boots. Yeah, it was pretty awful. But it was, fun, different. So my career path had a lot of twists and turns, and sometimes I found myself completely off the path. And it wasn't until my kids were school age that I went back to school to become an RN. And so we would do our homework at the kitchen table, and the kids getting through elementary school, and I working towards my degree, and finally got it, and then worked in various places as an RN. That's the nice thing about being an RN. You can do a lot, and there's so much you can do. And then ultimately, when I ended up at Disney, while I was there, I took advantage of the educational reimbursement program that they had for salaried cast members. And basically, you'd front the money for your classes, and they would reimburse you. And then you worked for the company for a year or two, whatever the criteria was at the time. Basically, you worked that off, and you didn't have to repay that. And it was wonderful. I got a bachelor's in science and business management that way, and then went on for a master's degree in emergency and disaster management through the educational reimbursement program. And then a couple of years before before COVID hit, Disney had started the Aspire program, which was a program for hourly cast members to go to college. No reimbursement. They didn't have to put out a cent. Everything was paid for by the company, and they never had to pay it back. It was something the company wanted to do to help people better themselves. So if you were a custodial cast member and you wanted to learn business, you could go and get a degree in business if you wanted, or whatever your interests were in. And it was a fabulous program. I hope it continues for a long time because it was a great opportunity. One of my EMTs got a master's in business administration, and I was very proud of her. I when she graduated. It was in the midst of COVID, and so I attended her graduation online, and it was wonderful. I was very excited for her.
Wow. Having personal knowledge, I always knew Disney was a great company to work for. I used to say, I'm going to move to Florida and be Cinderella. Mm-hmm. I don't fit the Cinderella type.
Oh, there you go.
I can't sing. But it sounds like it was really, really great. It opened up a lot of doors for you.
It's a great experience.
All through your career. And so I'm really interested. You are currently serving on the National EMS Advisory Council, NEMSAC. And how were you made aware of that? I mean, there's not a lot of people on the council representing, nurse and EMS and hospitals and 911 and firefighters. And where did you hear about that, and how did you apply?
I think, I had heard about it. I was signed up for a lot of newsletters involving EMS, and on one of the newsletters that I got, in my email one day, it talked about applications now being accepted to be a member of NEMSAC, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I wonder what that is. I had no idea, and I think, like most of the country, no one knows what NEMSAC is. I think it needs to be publicized a little better. I think we talked about that at our council meetings. So I looked into it, I researched it, and I thought, yeah, this is something I really want to be a part of. And so I went to my vice president and asked him if he thought this would be something I could do. And I said, now just know I don't have a snowball's chance, and we're getting it, so don't get excited. But can I apply? And he said, well, you're not going to get it if you don't apply, so you definitely have to. And he said, but before you do, we have to clear this with government relations. Disney is a bureaucracy unto itself. And those nice folks, they were very excited about it once I told them what it was. And I, again, prefaced it by saying, I'm not going to get it, but I want to apply. And so I applied, and months and months later, received the email first before the letter came, appointing me to represent the emergency management sector. So NEMSAC is a 25 people council, each person. We don't represent the company we work for or the agency we work for. We represent a sector that is involved in EMS, and my sector is emergency management. And so I got that email. I was very excited. I actually had one of my assistant managers read the email because I thought, I must be missing something here. I was so excited. I was like not processing. And then little did I know there would be like a lot of work to it. But yeah, it's been great. What I do and what each member does, they represent their sector. And so when we're creating advisories or position papers, white papers, whatever, as a council, I'm reviewing each document from the perspective of emergency management and making sure that it is supported by best practices in my field. And, you're doing the same in your field, and the hospital-based EMS and fire-based EMS and volunteer and rural EMS and ambulance company. We all look at it from our perspective and give our input. And it just makes the product better, and then the product gets pushed out nationally and then down to the state and local level. So it's nice to see what we're doing help our communities.
So did you say you had not heard of NEMSAC before the opening came?
Yeah. No, I did not know what it was. And I saw an opening for NEMSAC, and I went, oh, what's that? So then, of course, I had to, research it, and I thought, oh my goodness. And I looked at past advisories. I read through all of them, so I kind of knew, oh, that's what this is. And it just was great. It called to me. I just thought, I really want to be a part of this. And so, we're in our second term now. So we get 2 terms, and then we term out and new folks take our places. So there's always fresh ideas coming in. And so we just welcomed our new members, our junior class, recently. And so they're learning the ropes quickly.
Well, I know that the NEMSAC is lucky to have you. You're just a wealth of knowledge and information.
Well, thank you.
So now you've
Thank you.
retired. Yeah, you're welcome. I retired, and I use that lightly because I just can't even imagine, after everything you've said, just kicking back and drinking a nice tea. What are your plans for the future, for yourself, and where do you go?
Well,
where are you going now?
Well, I do find time to kick back and sit on my porch and drink the iced tea, of course. But,
Good for you.
Yeah, it was one of those things. My husband and I like to do stuff outdoors. We kayak and we fish and we do all that kind of stuff. But we also, before I retired, I had been helping a risk management company that supports conferences and conventions and that kind of thing. They would call every so often and ask medical questions, mostly COVID related at that time, as we were just starting into the whole COVID thing. And so I would, give them the latest information that I had, and that would help their clients make decisions for their conferences. And then after doing that for quite a while, and I never thought twice about it, they offered me a position with their company, and it's part-time. And so I'm the medical risk manager, and I provide best practices, so trying to stay current on the evolving COVID situation, plus any other communicable disease stuff coming down the pike. Also helping the company to understand what the local EMS environment is wherever the conference is planned. Closest ambulance or paramedics, closest hospitals, that kind of research stuff that I would help with. And then a lot of times I get to go to the conference and be there and deal with whatever happens. I'm not the first responder. I don't take the place of the local responders. I'm there to help the conference organizers put together their processes, and so that if something were to happen to an attendee, they've already got a process in place that everybody steps in, everybody knows their job, and I'm just there to troubleshoot, basically. And so I do that, so I get to travel a little bit here and there. I've been back to California once, to San Diego, and that was just lovely. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. Colorado Springs, Atlanta. I've got a conference coming up in Las Vegas next month. And so that's kept me busy. And in between conferences, my husband and I had the opportunity to be contractors for a company that contracts with Tennessee agriculture. And we go out and get plant samples, and we're assigned to go out to different farms, get plant samples, ship them off to an identified lab that they need to go to. And that's to make sure that they are within all the parameters for whatever crop the person is growing. So the most common one is hemp, to make sure that there's not a THC level above 0.3%. If there is, then they might have to retest their crop or destroy their crop. But generally, hemp doesn't have any of the psychoactive properties. And so once they get the results back from the lab, then the farmer can process their crop. But until then, they have to wait to do the harvest. So we get to travel all over the state.
I had no idea there was such a thing.
It's nice. Oh, we didn't either.
Very
An
cool.
old friend of ours said, hey, why don't you try this? So it's great. We've met a lot of neat people. I thought hemp growers would be the hippy-dippy sorts, but they're really not. They're from all walks of life. There are the hippy-dippy sorts, but then, there's the business people. And there's a lot of products that can be made from hemp. I'm learning. I knew nothing about it prior to this. But it's been interesting when we've seen parts of the state we would never have seen in beautiful, beautiful areas in Tennessee. So
Yeah, Tennessee is a beautiful state. It's one of my favorites.
My husband, it's beautiful. Yeah. And it's time that my husband and I can spend together, and we just load the dogs in the back seat of the truck, and off we go for the day and visit the farms.
How fun. Well, Lori, you have just been a delight. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
It's really been fun learning about your career. And I wish you all the best in your retirement.
Thank you.
Again, I say that lightly. And thank you.
Yeah.